Hi, welcome to John Box Watercolor. Today we're going to be going over 3 tips to help you bring more light into your paintings. As always, if you don't mind, give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And if you like what you see, consider subscribing. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, guys, so as mentioned, today is going to be all about painting buildings in light. I'm going to put our reference photo over here on the right just so you can briefly take a look. We've got this really nice front lit building kind of looming up over the street. It's got some side features in another building here. They're going to be in shade, but overall we're going to be kind of focusing on this front area. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, let's talk about our first tip, and that is going to be that any features, regardless of whether or not you're painting a building, a figure, or what have you, any features that are in light are going to be needed, or they're going to need to be complete on the first wash. So what I mean by that is you'll see me a lot of times kind of doing a sky wash and going right through the building and then coming back later and doing a second wash over the top of that. Well, if you're doing a building in light, that's not going to work. You need to have those features painted on this first wash. And so you'll see that I've done my sky here. I've just used a little Cobalt Blue. I'm going to get something a little bit darker for the top here just to kind of frame things up. But I haven't touched this building yet. And that's because this building is going to need to be painted on this first wash. With watercolor, we can only get darker as we move on through the number of our washes. And so if I need this to be bright, I need this to be done on the first wash. That white paper behind the building or behind this wash is what's going to help it sort of glow. All right, so I'm going to also, this kind of quickly brings me on to tip number 2, is that we need to leave some white paper behind. When we've got a building, we've got a figure in direct sunlight, there are going to be highlights in areas that are sort of kind of blown out in brightness where the sun is hitting them directly. And so you want to make sure to leave a few areas that are direct white paper here. All right. Grab a little bit of water here and just spread it around. And for this main building here, I'm using some yellow ochre, a little burnt sienna. And you'll notice too, I'm just letting this kind of bleed into the sky as well. All right, that looks pretty good. I think I'm going to leave this umbrella here white as well. We're going to leave that as the white of the paper. Let's come underneath here. And just kind of coming down to my street line here. All right, and I'm going to grab a little bit of thick paint. Let's do something warm. We'll do a little burnt sienna, a little bit of this scarlet here. And I'm going to just brush it over on the edge there to kind of let that bleed in to our sky a little bit, because I think we're going to do a kind of a warm red roof there. Yeah, just something like that. All right. Let's work down here on the bottom. So since we've got a warm building up top and a lot of sunlight here, I want to keep this warm on the bottom as well. I may try to cool it down just a touch, but overall, I want to maintain that warmth there. I'm going to grab my larger brush. Pull that through. That's a little too cool in my opinion, but really I'm just trying to get things darker as I move down the page. I want to have that dark sort of perspective on the bottom of our wash there. I'm just going to glance through here, and I'm going to leave some white areas through there, the whites of the paper, just again to help create that feeling of brightness. All right, so let's let this dry. We're going to come back and start our second wash. All right, we're back and ready to start working on our second wash. Now, I'm going to go ahead and move into tip number 3. And this may be the most important of the 3. And that is that when we're doing our second wash, we're going to be focusing on shadows. And we need those shadows to be fairly dark. The reason for that is because lightness or brightness in a painting, it's all relative. There cannot be light without dark, and sometimes I see beginners sort of being weary of getting too thick with their pigments, and they don't ever get their shadows dark enough to really accentuate and pull out the lightness that they're trying to get across. So you really do not want to be afraid to get dark and take advantage of creating contrast. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to start on this left side here. Now, this is in shadow, but what's nice is that we left this roof up here, or we did that on our first wash, as we talked about. So it's going to make that roof really pop out and give the feeling that it's in light. And then the rest of this is going to be in shadow. Now, I'm using another mop brush here, and I'm trying to just kind of vary the tones of my shadow as I move down. Now, the most important part is that as I move towards the bottom of this building and I get close to that umbrella, I'm going to want to darken things up a bit. Just so, again, I want to put the lightest lights next to my darkest darks. That's how you get that really nice pop and contrast. And I'm going to use some really dark paint to go right around the edge of that umbrella. And you will see that, I mean, it really just helps it pop out and almost glow. All right. Now, let me grab another brush here. I'm also going to throw some shadows across the face of our building. I'm going to warm those up just a little bit there. And I'm going to try to throw one right across there, kind of to create some architectural suggestions. There would also be, you know, a shadow up under the eave of that roof there. All right. And maybe these are going to be windows here later on, so maybe just a few kind of shadowy suggestions underneath them. All right. Now let's start to work on this other side here. Again, trying to keep it dark. It's what allows us to create the impression of light. And a lot of times you may see how dark this shadow is, or the marks on this building, and sort of get intimidated or start to think, oh no, that's too dark, that doesn't look right. Remember that what you see is not what you get in watercolor. It's going to dry lighter, and you've got to keep that in mind. If it looks right when you put it down, it is going to be wrong when it dries. All right. Let's try to frame up this building here. I think that looks pretty nice. I'm just squinting a little bit, just trying to make sure that we've got some variation in what's going on. Now, I want to let this shadow from the building here kind of creep over into our foreground here. Maybe do something like that. And I want to really cool it down. Now, the reason for that is just that I want to have some variation in my temperature. If my shadow is the same temperature as the building there, it's not going to read as a shadow. And don't be afraid to get really blue with it. I promise it will not look nearly as funny as it does when you first put it down. All right, maybe just a little bit there along the bottom. Okay, I think that looks nice. Let's also get some more cool shadows for underneath this umbrella here, right? We'll do something like that, I think. That looks nice. And just a little bit underneath as well to kind of connect that building in the background. Well, we'll do something like that. Okay. Now, one thing I want to do very quickly while this is still wet, I'm going to take some This is a completely dry brush. I'm going to dip into my paint, and I'm going to give this just a bit of a roof line, just so it can bleed a little bit since this is still wet. I'm going to do the same thing there. All right. Okay. Let's do a bit of work on our windows here. I kind of like to think about these paintings in 3 steps for these really bright ones. We're going to have our first wash. Everything's light, bright. Then we're going to get really dark and contrasty with our shadows. And then we want to be thinking about dry brushing here. And so I'm just creating some lines for my windows. Just some brown there. Little burnt sienna mixed with some warm gray. Just something like that for now. We're going to come back and add some more windows, more details and things here shortly. But for now, we're going to leave this as is. We're going to let it dry. We're going to come back and finish everything up. All right, we're back and ready to start adding in our darkest darks. I'm going to be doing this mostly with a dry brush today. And that's just to help get some kind of broken edges on our shapes here. Not to mention, when you use a dry brush and you're using just pigment straight out of your watercolor pails here, it really helps get that thick pigment that we can use to generate some contrast. I'm going to start here on the side of this building and just indicate some windows there. The other great thing about a dry brush is that it sort of allows you to make some, I guess we'll call them artistic mistakes. It doesn't always have to be perfect. We'll just put 2 there like that. Okay. Let's just kind of create some perspective lines there. Adding just a little bit of water there. That's just to help get the paint to kind of work its way onto my brush a little bit better. We'll do the same thing here. You'll notice how easy this is. I mean, I'm really just blotting the brush. I'm not doing a whole lot. Now, when I get ready to do some of this dry brush work on the building, I want to pick a color that's a bit warmer and a bit more saturated. See, that brown is going to look a lot better than if I used that dark black. I'm going to do something like that. I actually want to come in here and kind of redo these windows. They didn't turn out as I had hoped. Let's see if we can fix them. I think that looks okay. I'm not ecstatic about those windows. We're going to draw some lines here, get a little bit darker here. And this is really just for architectural kind of suggestions of stories on our building here. I'll draw one there. Maybe get just a little bit darker across the top. Maybe something like that. Okay. I think that looks nice. All right. Building's coming together here. Let's add a couple of details on top of our roof. I always like to add a couple of kind of chimney pieces. I think it just has such a nice feel to it. Now I will take some paint that is not so dry, and we're going to pull some shadows across this building. Something like that. All right, maybe we'll do one here as well. Okay. And just suggesting a little architecture there. Not too much. Okay. So far, I like the way this is looking. Buildings look nice. But we got to remember that the real key to what we're doing here, it kind of comes from the figures and what's going on down low. That's what really pulls a painting together. So first thing I want to do, I'm going to start with my darker figures here. I'm going to reach in again with my dry brush. I'm going to pull some pure lavender out. As some of you may know, that is kind of my all-time favorite color when it comes to watercolor. And I'm going to grab my smaller brush for the details here. Now, one mistake I made as I was watching this dry earlier is that I should have, on our shadow here, continued this out, because there's going to be a shadow from this figure walking. And so we're going to do our best to match the tone and color of that shadow, but we'll see what we can do. All right, so I got a little something here. I wanted that to be a little bit more broken. I don't like to leave the legs so structured in a painting. I want to, again, kind of create that feeling of movement and just suggesting what's there. And those came out a little bit thick there. We'll throw a little hair on. That looks more for what I'm going for. I also had made, I wanted to have a little dog here. This gentleman's walking his dog. How we're going to do that is I'm just going to make sort of a warm, dark smudge here. We're going to pull down some limbs. Maybe a tail. A face of some kind, but you'll notice how abstract that is. It really does not look like much at all, but if you get a couple of bits right, the eye will fill in what's there. I want to put some ears on them, but that's okay. We'll throw the shadow on there and it'll look good as new. Let's darken up those pants a little bit there. And you know what? I'm going to give him a jacket. This individual is up close in the painting, so I really need them to stand out and kind of pull the eyes forward. So we'll give him a jacket. A little more burnt sienna there for a hand or something. I think that's good. Maybe their face is a little bit too long there. I always do that. Let me pull the shirt up a little bit. Give him a turtleneck or something. All right. It looks okay. Let's work into the back here. Now the figures on this side are mostly in the dark. So I'm going to try to use darker colors. And I'm going to try to dry brush them in as well. Anytime you have things that are not directly in light or in shadow, you kind of want to break up their edges a bit more. Just because we don't see lines as clearly typically when things are dark. And again, just trying to keep it very abstract here. Now these figures over here, they're directly in light. And so I'm going to have to be careful when I paint these folks. I'm going to reach over. It's always hard for you to see this top right color I have on my palette. This is Chinese white. And I'm going to come in right here to this first figure that I want to have kind of walking left to right here and use that there. Something a little bit brighter of a color. We'll let that bleed in. Let's grab something darker for the lower half there. Just kind of have them walking that way. Now I can be a little bit looser here with these figures because it can be read two ways. They can be in the light or slightly in the dark that's being cast from that umbrella. So I can sort of play these how I want. I'll do a warmer color there, a red maybe. And you'll notice how dry that is. It's really going to help give me some soft edges as I kind of essentially sort of smear that brush around. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab one of my tubes here. I'm going to pull just straight Chinese white from the tube. Let's see here. My paint is a little bit dry there. I'll put that on camera so you can see. I've got some stuck to my finger. All right, let's pull. I left this open the other day. That's my, actually, you want to know my biggest tip is don't leave your paints open. Believe it or not, it's not great for the paint. So let's add some faces here, just some burnt sienna. A little bit of that neutral tint, and we'll pull some legs down. Those legs are a little long. Something like that. We got 3 people walking there. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a little dark paint and just throw it in the background there, just to give the impression of, you know what, I need to add a door or something here as well. Something like that. I wanted to just throw in some kind of dark smudges and things, just to throw in a little activity there in the background. Now, let's see if we can't match the shadows that we've created previously. That looks decent. Let's see how that looks. It doesn't need to be much. I think it needs a little bit more blue. Won't be a huge deal if these don't match perfectly, but you know, the closer we can get, the better. I think that looks good for the dog. I'll just pull out something there. Just very abstract. That looks okay. A little bit darker than our shadow, but again, it should dry lighter. And you'll notice, again, I talk about being confident and brave when you're making these shadow marks in a scene where there's a lot of light, because you need, absolutely need, I'm gonna throw a dark edge on that umbrella. You need that contrast. I want to see dark shadows laying across that very light ground there. It's what creates, I mean, it is strange to think about, but the darkness is kind of what creates light. So you need to not be afraid to, again, go dark with it. Throwing a couple little things just on that roof there. I'll throw another jacket over there. Nobody has a jacket over here. I'll throw it on that figure. Okay, this looks very nice. All right, I'm gonna let this dry, and the last thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add our highlights with our gouache, and we are going to be done. All right, we're back, ready to finish this up. Got my white titanium gouache as always. We're gonna add some highlights here. And if there was ever a time to need highlights, it is when you are doing a building with some, or a painting with some light in it. Really, really helps bring out figures that are in the dark, like those there. Add a little bit more there to this shoulder. I want to really bring that out. We'll do some here. And I talk about this in some other videos, but if you can, try to vary how you do your highlights here. I'm going to throw a little leash there. Just a little scraping. I shouldn't have gone back over it. Let me see here. I got my palette knife. It looks a little thick. Not the end of the world, but it's fine. I talk about varying how you do your highlights on your figures. You'll notice I went kind of, everybody's got a little highlight on their head, but this guy has it on his right shoulder. This has it on their left. You just want to try to vary things up. And also don't just throw in some, don't be afraid to just throw in some vertical lines. And oops, didn't mean to do that, but it's okay. That's why it's called art, you know? If we wanted it to be a perfect representation of what was there, then we would go pick up a camera. All right, maybe a line through there just to break it up. I don't know. Looks fine. Just trying to see if there's anything else to do. It can be so hard to stop sometimes, but I once heard an artist say, if you have to look more than 10 seconds to find something to paint, you're done. So I think we're gonna call it there, and let's sign it, do a little recap, and kind of go over our tips again. So we'll start with the tips, just to recap you guys. Tip number 1 is gonna be anything that's in light, the umbrella, front of this building here, the road, needs to be complete on that first wash. You do not want to be going over it ever again as you're finishing the painting up. It will only get darker. It will only take light away. Our second tip is that we left white in areas where there are light. So we've got this big umbrella here. We've left white where our windows were. We've got kind of just some specks of white all over the place in light areas. Again, it's more of an abstract concept, but those could all be things that are just objects directly in light. And it saves us too from having to go back and use too much gouache. I'm trying to sign this here, but my brush is, I tend to mistreat my brushes, and so they lose their points after a while. And this one is on its last leg. Well, I've got this red. I'm going to throw it, I don't know. I was going to do a tie, but kind of smeared. We'll just do another bit of red. And any red over here. It's always hard to stop when I've got this color, but I'm going to listen to my own advice. And then our very last tip is that without darkness, you cannot have light. That darkness is what's going to create the contrast that makes you feel like there's a real pop of light in what's going on. So do not be afraid to go dark. Now, just a kind of brief overview of our painting here, what I like, what I don't like. Overall, I think this turned out very nice. I think the windows got a little messy. I would have liked to clean those up, but I think they go well with the style of this painting overall. So I don't think they necessarily look out of place, but just my own style. I would have liked to clean those up a bit, which is fine. Maybe would have liked to throw a car or something in here just because it's people and an umbrella. I'm glad we have the dog, kind of breaks it up, or cat, you know, whatever you want to make that. And I think the dry brush windows in our shadows look really nice. So overall, very happy. If you like any of these works, they're going to be for sale in my store. As always, remember to keep on painting, and thanks for stopping by.